Let's touch a little bit on SAC planning. So one of the key components here of SAP Analytics Cloud is that it does not just reporting and analytics, but also planning, right? So, and people say, what do you mean by planning? Well, financial planning, sales planning, marketing planning, IT planning, HR planning, supply chain planning, all of these components of planning enabled in one place. So think of customers that were previously using BPC for planning, or some other third-party tool, living in the same tool in a web-based interface where users can interact with the data and create those plans that can be then circled back to perform analytical scenarios. Many of you may have seen this picture before. You've got on the left a planning scenario, on the upper right an analytics scenario, and on the lower right a predictive scenario. That closed loop, right? You can plan, you can analyze, you can predict, you can plan, you can analyze, predict in one tool is certainly something that we've seen here at NIMBL as a rather killer application for SAC. I would argue that the second most popular tool in SSRBNF is the scissors, and the scissors really allow you to cut up the data yourself and to do things with it that you want. And that's really the power of planning. It shouldn't be, none of these things should be treated in isolation anymore. They don't need to be. Whereas in former lives of mine, you had, let's say, a trade promotion planning system, a demand planning system, a financial planning system, and a reporting and analytics system with BW. It was very difficult to bring all that data together into one place and provide a kind of seamless user experience for the user. The other very important thing here is that everything is collaborative in a cloud-based system like SAC, right? That users can comment and interact with the pieces of data throughout the cycle such that all the players, so to speak, all the links in the chain are able to work together for the common goal. So here's an example, just a little demo screen capture of SAC planning. You can see on the left that numbers are being adjusted. You can also see here that a predictive model is being generated off of this data. The cool thing is on the right, you're looking at a dashboard, you could argue, or at least a visualization of the data as you're planning it. And I'm sorry, and on the left, you're looking at the data that's being inputted by users, right? I'm not sure, and maybe I should have asked, maybe at the end, if we have enough time, we can cover how many of you are using planning functions today with SAP Analytics Cloud, and Sharon can certainly touch on Blue Diamond Growers' journey thus far with this component of SAC, right? SAC, just to be clear, is one product, but the planning component of it is licensed slightly separately, differently. It's just an add-on license to a given SAC tenant, but one system that does both. SAC planning extended with AI and ML. So what do we mean by that? What does AI and ML mean in this context? So for many organizations, an existing architecture exists for doing planning and prediction, right? In most cases, the current system has poor visualizations and is rather complex to use for the user, right? It's not a self-service necessarily platform that allows for ease of use. If you have a predictive analytics server, it's generally a separate thing. Again, it has poor visualizations, it has a high cost to integrate with necessary systems. So your architecture already is separated. And then third, most organizations would have an enterprise BI system. That takes a lot of effort to integrate the data, and it's difficult to do rapid prototyping, right? Together, this kind of architecture keeps everything separated and means that for many organizations, they say, hey, we want to do prediction. Okay, give a download of the data to a third-party company or a third-party system that will do that prediction and then feed it back into a planning or BI system. But having it all in one place really allows a lot more power. The data doesn't have to move around, and the architecture and the TCO of that architecture remains much more simplified. From a people perspective, right? You've got a planner on the left here. This person has, they don't have good aggregation context. They have lots of manual adjustments and version control that they have to do, right? They don't have a system in which they can see the iterations as the data is being provided to them. For a data scientist, again, it's somebody, either a rare skill that you've managed to hire or a third party that you may have reached out to ask for this capability, right? They're frustrated because they have to get data from multiple systems. That by the time they get it, it may be somewhat stale. And for them, then they have to send it back and translate that data into a format that the planner and or the BI analyst can consume. On the BI developer side, same thing. They don't see the big business context necessarily because they're living in their BI world. It takes a long time for requirements to be gathered, and there's a high likelihood that things get miscommunicated in the process, right? This is not something that you can say, hey, give me a file of last year's sales, and then I'll go off for a month and do my data science, and then I'll send it to the BI person. You could, but by the time that process completes, the ship has sailed and your business has somewhat moved on. It's important when you start looking at a closed loop ecosystem where you can do planning, BI, and predictive all in one place. With SAC, really you have that one person, one tool. So the tool does the data science, the tool does the data integration, the tool does the visualization, and the user consumer is both a user consumer of the data. So they're planning, they're predicting, and they're analyzing at the same time. This is quite different. It's obviously a new paradigm in this area for a lot of analytics tools. And I think given SAC's maturity with both analytics and with prediction, it really sets the stage well for this product to be a kind of a one-stop shop for these things. I call it the magnifying glass. You know, it's funny because I was trying to think what's the best tool on the Swiss Army knife to think about prediction, right? And everybody always thinks of a telescope or a magnifying glass. It's interesting to think that in some cases, people have a magnifying glass and they're not using it. And today, SAC has these tools and they're not using it. Many people aren't using it. So it is certainly the beginning of a journey for both SAC and for many customers in this predictive space, but it's a really exciting space to be moving into. What SAC is not, I think this is almost as important as what it is, right? I have a scar here. I don't know if anyone can see, probably not, from when I was probably 10 years old and I tried to cut down a tree with my Swiss Army knife and failed miserably and cut my finger pretty badly. You know, it's not necessarily a one-stop tool for everything people want to do. I think of trying to cut down a tree with a Swiss Army knife as trying to use a tool like SAC as a data extraction tool or a data dumping tool. When customers ask me, how can I build a dashboard that will display 100,000 rows of data? My first question is, why are you trying to do that? And what are you trying to do with SAC? Because you may not need to be cutting down the tree with your Swiss Army knife, or you may need a chainsaw. You may need a data integration tool, a data extraction tool that's really designed to do that, right? That's a tool for cutting down trees. We are not cutting down trees here. We're whittling and we're opening bottles of wine, to continue my analogy from earlier. The other thing it's not is this super Swiss Army knife with 800 tools on it, right? There are probably certain things that a given niche tool, maybe even a business objects tool, does better. If you think about formatted, very highly formatted reports that Crystal Reports does, right? That may be a tool on the Swiss Army knife that's not in SAC just yet, but it is certainly, you know, the tools are going to grow. But nobody should think necessarily that SAC is the end-all be-all for all their BI needs. One thing that we love to advocate at NIMBL is that if you're starting a journey for deployment of SAC, that you do user profiling exercise workshops where you really understand what are the business users trying to do. You know, if you look at the plethora of Swiss Army knives out there, some of them come with fish scaling tools, some of them come with pliers, some of them come with files, nail clippers. If that's things that the business wants to be able to do, if there are certain reporting and analytical scenarios that they need, we got to make sure we have the right tool for the job and match that tool to the job. In many cases, it may be SAC. In some cases, maybe SAC augmented with something else. So SAC is not a data warehouse. This is also an important point. I find many customers believing that they can now live in a world where they have S4 and SAC, and they don't need any data warehouse in which to combine their data. But for most customers, and it sounds like for many of you, based on the poll questions, a data warehouse is in place, and more importantly, it's required. SAC can consume data from a data warehouse, but it in and of itself is not a data warehouse. And I'll touch on that with a bit more detail in a second.